Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name's Mel Sherwood, and for the last 10 years, I've been working with business leaders, entrepreneurs, and teams, helping them to improve their public speaking and their confidence. In this series of interviews, I'm fortunate to be interviewing and in conversation with professional public speakers who I admire and who are at the top of their game. So we'll be learning a little bit about their journeys to becoming a professional speaker, and they're also going to share their top tips on how you can improve your own communication. Now, my guest today is an author and global speaker who, despite being an extrovert herself, is known as the champion for introverts. She helps teams to be more effective by understanding how to harness the talent of both extroverts and introverts. Her best-selling books, The Introverted Leader, Quiet Influence, The Genius of Opposites, and Creating Extrovert-Friendly Workplaces have been translated into 17 languages. She's consulted with hundreds of organizations, including NASA, Capital One, and Amazon. She's run leadership programs from Singapore to Spain and has been featured in Forbes, Time Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. As a recognized certified speaking professional, or CSP, I know that she's going to have loads of tips to share with us on how we can enhance our communication. So I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome the fabulous Jennifer Kahnweiler. Welcome.
Mel. It's a wonderful, wonderful introduction. Since I wrote it, I guess I liked it. Most of it, anyway.
Absolutely, and I think so important for speakers and anyone presenting to give their host some information so they can set the scene. So there's number one tip for people. So let me understand a little bit about how you first became a speaker, and maybe even your experiences of standing in front of an audience, whenever that first time was for you, and what you can remember from that experience.
Thank you, Mel, for having me too. I try to forget about that time. No, not really. I remember those times as being ones. I started out actually doing workshops. I was started out from a counseling, coaching perspective, working in education, and I was asked to do workshops at the university I was at. And I remember being so terribly nervous that my knees were shaking, and it was only probably about maybe 6, 7 people in the audience. It was a small group, but it was that, that stomach butterflies that we get, the sweaty palms. I had that for some time. And I started to realize that I needed to get over that, and so how was I going to do that? And part of the issue for me, I started to prepare, but not over prepare, because I realized that I was getting into this cycle. Well, I don't know enough about this topic. And so what if they ask me this? So my nerves and my anxiety were really just getting totally in the way, performing a roadblock for me getting relaxed and to just, I knew that I knew enough to teach this, or I hadn't been asked to be. There were topics about job search and things that I was, coaching and had a lot of expertise in by this point. So that was a big turning point for me when I started to relax a little bit more and go with the flow. Then I was able to actually be more present with my audiences. And so that was really where I started, in those little workshops back in the University of Cincinnati back then.
Wow. And I think actually a lot of people have similar experiences where we get so hung up on being perfect and not enough. And a lot of my clients have that experience. And I love the fact that you were able to eventually sort of let go and trust that you have that information, and trust that the right words will come out at the right time in the right order.
That is true. That is true. And I have to say that it wasn't a linear path, Mel, because as I moved more into, I came to keynote speaking, where I've connected with you from the training world. So I was working a lot in organizations after higher ed. I moved into companies like GE, and, there was a lot of type A pressure, kind of like to perform. So, there were times then where I would feel a lot of anxiety. And again, that would get the best of me sometimes. However, I remember one time, one of my mentors who was helping me with a course I was teaching, he just turned to me, and I just remember his face. And he said, "Jennifer, you've got this." You know, you've got this. So I started to internalize that message for myself, but I by no means was it like just, oh yeah, now all of a sudden I'm fine. And, you know, I think all of us professional speakers, even who've been doing this for a long time, you know, if we don't get nervous, if I don't get a little nervous and anxious, then I kind of worried. I think that, well, maybe I'm coasting. Maybe I'm not challenging myself. I don't have a new story in there, or, you know, not really sure about the audience. And my daughter, who has performed a lot, has said to me, you know, she taught me, well, why don't you just kind of think about that energy channel it right into something positive, into your speech. And so, you know, I take these lessons from people along the way. But, you know, I think people out there don't ever think it's ever gone away. Would you agree?
I totally agree. Totally agree. And I'm the same. I like to have a little bit of that nervous adrenaline. It keeps me sharp. I'm able to use that energy in my performance, I suppose. When we're standing in front of an audience, it is ultimately a performance. So I think it's a matter of learning how to manage the nerves and not let them manage you.
Oh, I love that. No, absolutely. That's true. And I think what's helped me over the years, first of all, I learned don't drink more than 1 cup of coffee in the morning, you know, have a speech that day. I know for me, that caffeine can really make me talk really fast and my heart can start beating. Don't do it. You know, even if I'm tired, drink water. That's the best thing. Not too much water, because then I might have to take some breaks, right? A lot. But, you know, and breathing, those simple being aware of my body, I think has really been a big plus. You know, I do yoga and meditation and more yoga. And I just kind of like, oh, okay, where is my body right now? What's tight? And just focusing on that, you know, really allows me to be present. And then that allows me to be present with people.
Yeah, I love that. Do you have a specific routine or anything that you do before you step in front of an audience?
Well, I do clear, you know, we've been doing so much virtual lately. I'm kind of in that mindset of what do I do here, you know, in my home office. And I have really been very, very intentional about not scheduling anything before a speech. Even I had a speech the other night at 5 p.m. And I purposely didn't schedule things that day because I know what it does. It takes my focus off the program that I'm going to be giving, because it's like, even in my mind, as you know, that day is going on, I'm kind of like shaping, even subconsciously, right, how I'm going to present certain parts, or I might shift something around or delete a slide, you know. But if I'm talking with clients or doing other things that are going to be distracting me, even like going to the grocery store, that can be a distraction.
Yeah.
So I try to take a walk. That's part of it. Just very calming kind of activities that don't take a lot of like mental space. And for me, that's really been a plus.
Yeah. And I think if we can manage to allow that time or find that time, fantastic. Unfortunately, life isn't like that. And people in business, for example, if you're presenting to your team or you've got to pitch or whatever, you don't always have that time. So I suppose it's a case of sort of preparing yourself in the time that you can, and maybe that's, you know, even a few hours before the actual presentation or speech that you're delivering, and then ideally finding just a few moments at least right beforehand to center yourself and do some breathing and, you know, get yourself in the right state.
I agree. But whenever you have a choice to maybe block off some time, if you're not in the kind of job where your boss is like, and I have people like this who are, you know, scheduling meetings for you, as you say, you could take an hour or two before. It really does make a huge difference. A lot of times we think we don't have that choice, you know. Like right now, I'm turning off my watch as it's going off. I should have put that on do not disturb, right? Yeah. So what can we do to just create space? I can't really emphasize enough how important that is. And, you know, I guess I'll share, you mentioned I work a lot with, mostly actually with introverted leaders, and bringing awareness to people in organizations about what introverts need. Well, it's like what all of us need to an extent, you know, and that is taking solitude and taking quiet time and just calming down. And I've learned from my introverted colleagues and my clients that a lot of times they do block off time. Like they'll, you know, or they'll say, can we just, our meeting culture is such that we're going from meeting to meeting. Can we just like have a 10-minute space and not allow people to, you know, schedule meetings on top of meetings? So I think that's one lesson that I've learned.
I think actually just on that, I think if someone in a workplace is being asked to deliver a presentation and they know what they need in order to deliver their best presentation,
Yes.
then it makes sense for them to share that with their colleagues. And hopefully we have open-minded teams who are able to support people in the different ways that they need to make sure that they're delivering their best when they get in front of an audience. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I'd also say you almost want to think about it as a bookend for me, whether you're working internally or on your own speaking. I think in the beginning, as we say, you want to take that space, but I think it's equally as important afterwards to decompress and to also pat yourself on the back if you tried something new or different. Excuse me, let's say you took a risk, which I think everybody should at least once in a speech.
Yes.
Try something different. Like last week, I tried an improv exercise on Zoom, like, oh, how's this going to work?
Wow, yeah.
And it worked. It worked beautifully. There were some things I would change about it, but we learn by just writing down. What I do is I take my notebook and I write down, like the old plus and delta. What can I improve? What right top of mind did I feel really good about went well, and then the delta might be, well, I need to shorten that story. Right. Or I need to maybe pull in another question at that point. And that continuous improvement is really important too. Otherwise you're moving on, to the next.
Absolutely.
To the
I think
gig.
The importance of actually reflecting on what you've done, and quite often you finish a speech or a presentation and your adrenaline's buzzing and you're sort of maybe tired and wired. That's where I get to sometimes.
I love that. Tired and
I'm exhausted, but I'm really wired and I can't relax or whatever. But taking the time to just reflect what went well, what might I improve on next time, is really crucial if we want to improve the way that we present. And it is all about practice and reflection, because you're right. If you just move on to the next presentation and don't take anything from it or think about what went well and what didn't, is really difficult to know how to improve that. So do you always film your talks?
Funny you say that. I was going to pull up another prop here. My phone was handy. And actually, you can see here what I'm doing is recording our conversation, because I want to pick up things, and see how that went and just learn from it and see maybe, like, I love some of the phrases you use that I might take. And of course, give you credit, Mel. But you have some nice
come out of my mouth. I don't even know where they come from sometimes.
Well,
maybe I heard someone else. I don't know.
Well, it's okay. I think the thing is, when we speak, we don't sometimes know, that we're going to say that, and we think, oh, that's a good catchphrase that I can integrate. But if I didn't record it, I might not remember that I said it. And I can use. So I really am always interested. I talked to somebody, what was it, a few weeks ago, and she was talking about being on a lot of podcasts. And I said, well, I know when I'm on a podcast, I like to at least listen to at least part of one that the person does, or hopefully the whole thing that the host is on, so I can understand, the vibe and just like what they might be asking, that kind of questions.
Yeah. And
I was really shocked that she said, oh, I never listened to them ahead of time. And I'm like, and then she said, I don't listen to them afterwards. I said, well, what's the learning there? In my opinion, you can learn and be somebody that gets asked back on podcasts, for instance, as a guest, because you're becoming a better guest.
Yes. Yeah. I think, and this is really what I've noticed about, professional speakers who are at the top of their game. They keep improving and they keep learning and they just keep refining and honing their skills. So often I'll speak to my clients and I suggest that they film everything and then review it. And of course, the initial response is cringe. Oh, I couldn't, I hate looking at myself. Yes. But it's the best way to learn. And I've learned so much just from that process myself, where I look back and I think, oh yeah, that could have been done a bit better. But I always suggest to people, when you watch it back for the first time, look for all the good things, because we very, very often go straight to the thing. Oh, what was my hair doing there? Oh, what's that awkward move? But if we look at it through an audience's eyes and look at what's coming across, it's very rarely anything to do with our hair or the way we moved our arm. So
yeah, and it's helpful to also have colleagues and respected friends take a look as well. Yeah. I remember I had something filmed at a speech a few years ago, and it was all guys. It was a male dominated tech organization. And afterwards, I had the camera person just kind of as an afterthought, start interviewing people, some testimonials. What did you get from the speech? What did you think of Jennifer's talk and all this? And it was some good footage, it was actually interesting. And so I showed it to one of my friends, Ken, and he said, Jennifer, oh, you need to use this. I was like, why? Why do I need to use these? He says, because so many of the videos I've seen, you have a lot of women in your audiences, which I didn't know at the time was the truth, but which was true. And I was like, well, I never would have even thought of that. He said, this is showing that you speak to many kinds of audience, which I do. It just so happens he had seen a few women's talk. I did a women's TED talk, so he was like, oh, you need to show this. And I wouldn't have known it had I not showed it to a colleague. So I think that we can always pick up things from our friends and colleagues.
Absolutely. Now, I'm intrigued to know, how did you become involved in, and how did you become an expert on introverts when you are an extrovert yourself?
That's a very legitimate question. I get asked it all the time, of course, and why not? Well, it really did start at home with my husband, Bill, who you know about, I've been married to a really long time, Bill. And we, first, we were like ships in the night passing, because I didn't understand really what was going on when he would come back. And after we were together out somewhere, and he'd go and hibernate for a few hours. I was like, what's wrong with this, guys? My friends were right. I never should have married. What's going on? And it turns out that he was an introvert. He learned that he was an introvert and I was an extrovert. And we used that description and that understanding through Myers-Briggs, and, a lot of people are familiar with, to really help navigate some of the things in our marriage, And as I started moving into more organizations, working, as I mentioned, in learning and training and speaking, coaching, it was a very helpful lens to use in working with my clients who didn't really have a clue that that's particularly the introverts. That's why they were so frustrated, that they were not being kind of fitting into the mold of, speaking up, being the first one to speak up in meetings and having like high energy and all of this, or high outward energy, I should say. And there were other things where they were feeling like they weren't being heard and visible. They were doing really hard work and behind the scenes, but not being recognized. Nobody was like asking about their work. And so there were many areas where I was coaching introverted leaders and people that wanted to emerge as leaders, but were feeling stifled. So that's where that knowledge then transferred into the workplace. And I was looking for, guides to help people. And at that point, back in 2010, not 2009, there was very, very little written about this. So that's when I wrote the first book, The Introverted Leader, which has been in a couple of editions. Yeah. And then went on from, you can see my selfless self-promotion here.
Go for it. I think, absolutely.
Yeah. So moved into looking at influence and how introverts influence how they lead, how also what we can learn, right, from each other in team, how introverts and extroverts can really create what I call genius opposites.
Nice. And then I love that phrase.
Sorry, you like that phrase?
Yeah.
Phrase that pays, as they say.
Absolutely.
And then the latest work has been around how do we have cultures that make it so that introverts don't always have to adjust to that side have to use that side of themselves, because we all have both sides, but the energy that it takes to like constantly be on and out there. Why can't we have spaces that allow for quiet? Why can't we take times in meetings where, we decompress and everybody's quiet, or when we're recruiting? So I look at 7 different practices in the latest book about what organizations do, best practices that they employ to make sure that everybody's voices are heard. So it's been a really, really cool journey to be able to keep looking for opportunities to share the message.
Brilliant. So what have you noticed a difference between the way introverts do a presentation versus extroverts? What are there different approaches or different styles, or does that just depend on the person generally?
I'd say the last point that you made is probably the most true, that it does depend on the person. However, I will say that there are some strengths that each bring to the table that they can capitalize in. And as I mentioned, nobody is actually a pure, total introvert. I mean, some are quite, if you think of it as a bell curve, there are people who are like you call outliers. Some people call themselves hermits, never come, it's very challenging for them to do any extroverted behavior, but we all need to connect with people. Then on the other hand, we have, extroverts who are extreme. We have friends who are maybe flaming extroverts, I call them, who never stop, always they want the stimulus. So it's around stimulation, right? How much stimulation do we need? And so extroverts actually crave it more than introverts. Okay, so vice versa. So what are the qualities or the strengths that introverts tend to bring? And one of them is preparation. So I mentioned before, over preparing. They don't necessarily over prepare, but they know that material. They memorize those stories. Not that extroverts don't, but they have the discipline. They know how important preparation is for them to feel confident.
Yep.
And to be able to then I have a model called the 4 Ps, which people can read about in my free downloadable chapters of my book, The Introverted Leader, on my website. But one of the 4 Ps is prepare. Then we have presence is the second one. So then when you prepare and you know your talk, then that allows you in the moment to flex and to be present also with and connect with your audience. So, I've had many times where I had kind of like, you might call it a lesson plan, and then the audience is parked somewhere else. One quick aside here, I'll mention, there was a group I was working with and the paychecks had been delayed. It was when they were still doing paper paychecks. You can imagine the people in that audience were not into my talk about motivation or whatever I was talking about. So we had to segue and find out what was happening with the paychecks, right? And deal with it so they could relax. So, but if I was all uptight about not being able to get my material in, it wouldn't have, the audience would have completely been lost, but they came back to me because we were able to deal with the present. Yeah. So I think preparing allows you to have the confidence. Okay, then I can be present. Yeah. So introverts do that really, really well. They prepare. And extroverts will tell you their quality is winging it. If you look at the extroverts, they can be extemporaneous and spontaneous. Now, some people will say, well, sometimes it's hot air, but you know what? When you get questions from the audience that you never anticipated, extroverts they're used to sort of reacting, right? So I would say that's a quality that they have that's extremely good for them to leverage. But we all need both. We need to do both. The extroverts need to prepare. The introverts, on the other hand, one way they can leverage their strength is to anticipate possible questions. I remember this one tip someone said to me. I said, I have a lot of quiet people in this audience. I know I'm going to be kind of a little bit stymied when we say, are there any questions? We usually recommend people do that before the final story, right?
Yeah,
that's absolutely. Right. We don't want to end on questions.
No,
right?
we don't. Yeah, you don't want to ask a question and then like tumbleweed and it's like awkward silence.
Awkward silence. Bye. No, but before with the end to ending, we say, well, are there any questions? So if people don't have questions, you could say something like, and I've used this. So many people ask me,
yes,
why introverts have a hard time in networking. Okay. So maybe people, that is probably true, but you plant the question, right? With yourself, right? Or you can obviously plant it with the meeting planner, having them choose some people to ask questions. I mean, that's preparation too, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely. Yeah.
I did a demo. I use demos a lot in live presentations. I like to throw in a demo. What do I mean by that? I'm trying to show people, how you can, as let's say an introvert, have some lines to spark a conversation up. Like that's a question that comes up a lot, right? So we say, let's get up here and let's have a demo. Okay. So what an introverted coach had told me once, he said, because he prepares really well, he said, make sure that you check with people ahead of time, right? And pick some people and ask the meeting planner or whoever hired you to figure out, who is it that would be good to up there that we want to have, and let them know, make sure it's okay with them. If they know, then it's cool. But if you all of a sudden you go, Mel, will you come up to the stage here?
Yes.
That could be really awkward. Would you agree?
Agree. Yeah, you put people on the spot, and it be very uncomfortable for everyone involved. So yeah, I
Exactly.
agree that that preparation is really key. And I identify more as an introvert than I do as an extrovert, even though I maybe don't come across that way when I'm in front of an audience. And so yeah, for me, there is a lot of prep
A lot
involved.
of
And
a
yeah,
lot of prep. And since I mentioned the two P's, I might as well mention the other
yeah,
two tend
please.
to be helpful with speaking, because we apply it to public speaking in one of the chapters in the Introverted Leader, and people find it helpful. So we prepare, we're present. Okay, so we pick up on what's going on in the moment. The third one is practice, and I mean, I'm sorry, push. I mixed them up. Third one is push, is to stretch, and I mentioned that earlier with just like trying something different, right? Even where you might stand or how you use your arms when you're talking, I think that's really key. And a lot of us now are doing videos stuff, so or virtual as well. So it's like learning a new skill there, right? And how we can use, for instance, I'll give you an example. One introvert friendly practice is to use more breakouts. If you're doing, let's say, a workshop or something a little over a shorter speech, really give people the chance to engage. It doesn't have to be very long. It can be a 7-minute, 8-minute breakout, where you throw a question out and you take the large group of, like, let's say 40, 50 people, say, we're going to go into quick breakouts. Well, if you're working that or you're working with somebody, you need to know how to do the breakouts seamlessly. How to use the technology to throw the question up there. And that's just an introvert friendly practice, by the way, because you're giving people in small groups, they can engage more deeply. So that's an example of something where you would push yourself, right? To do. The final one is practice. And that's mentioned. I wanted to use the term it came to me when you were speaking, Mel, about the word virtuoso. And that's like when we think about, the great violinists like Joshua Bell or others, they never stop, right, refining their craft. And Mike Rayburn, who's a member of NSA, has coined that term. And we all need to be virtuosos in whatever we do to continue.
Yeah.
Continue. The last example I use of a famous person is Jerry Seinfeld, the comedian. You wonder, why is he still out on the road doing shows? Well, he had a quote that I never forget, and I'm going to paraphrase, but it's about broadband. He said, my comedic muscle is like broadband. If you don't use it, it shrivels up.
Yeah.
So you all know practicing continually to get better is always looking at opportunities. And I've been so impressed by the introverted leaders who I work with, who intentionally work on these skills.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I've done a few of these interviews to date, and everyone brings up the idea of practicing. We don't get better at anything without practice, and public speaking and presenting is exactly the same. It's really interesting also that you have 4 P's. So I have a couple of made up words. One of them is pitch-tastic, and the other one is presentastic. And
I'm writing that down now. I'll have it on my recorder. Wait, pitch-tastic, and what's the other one?
Pitch-tastic or presentastic. Right. So and I have 3 P's that lead to that. So the first one is preparation, which you've talked about.
There we go. Great minds.
Practice. And the third one is actually passion. So I think, if we're not interested in what we're speaking about and enthusiastic, it's really hard to get our audience to be. So you need that dash of passion to create a presentastic presentation or a pitch-tastic pitch. So we're along the same lines there in terms of our advice and our thinking around that.
True synergy.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you got any particular speakers that you really admire or that you've learnt, something fundamental from?
I would say, let me think about that. I would say 2 people come to mind just immediately. One passed away been at least a year, Jeannie Robertson, who was a comedic speaker, a storyteller. Mm-hmm. Just brilliant. If anybody gets a chance to look at her videos, she was a former beauty queen who then became a incredible speaker. And when she would step on the stage at any of the NSA National Speaker Association events, you would just be captivated by her stories. And she's got a lot on YouTube. So Jeannie Robertson. And then my other favorite speaker has been a coach of mine, Bill Stainton, Stainton. I brought Bill into my world when I was, after I had published, I think it was my first book, and I wanted to tighten up the humor of, and come up with some, he's a funny guy. Okay. And he puts in humor into, and so he really helped me punch it up. And I worked with him on every one of my speeches to craft those so that they would have what we call edutainment. It's you would like that word, right?
I love that word.
Words. You love those fun words. So he's another, and he has a wonderful, wonderful TED Talk that Stainton. Bill specializes really in creativity and innovation. Mm-hmm. And his TED Talk, I could watch it over and over again, where he talks about how we are creative. So those are two people that just come to mind. There's so many others.
Yeah, I know in the field that we are involved in, we see so many amazing speakers all the time, don't we? But so it is hard to pinpoint one or two, and I'm amazed and very pleased that you've picked out those two. So I remember when the announcement came that Jeannie had passed away. And yes. Oh, I've just got a cat.
Oh, wait, I should bring my cat here. We can have a love
happen. We just let her do a thing.
I kept mine out of this room today.
I know, I had actually. I'm surprised she's managed to get in the room. Anyway, yeah. So I had actually had a look at I didn't know Jeannie's work, and I had a look at some of the footage on YouTube. And you're absolutely right. Like, and you've triggered me to go and have another look. And I will look up Bill as well. So thank you for sharing those.
And I really think it's important to watch talks and speeches, because we can always gain something from them that we can incorporate. Yeah, I'd highly recommend that.
Yeah, fabulous. So actually, speaking about recommendations, what would you recommend for someone who wanted to become a professional speaker?
Well, I think, first of all, you need to have a topic. You need to have a topic, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think you need to get practice. You need to get out there and start speaking. And I think one thing I wouldn't do is leave a solid job without having a track record of some speaking, right? I think people really get enthusiastic about it. Maybe they get a couple of gigs and they're like, oh, I'm going to leave my job. No, don't do that. Successful speakers, I can think of one, Ryan Jenkins, who Ryan stayed in his job here at AT&T until he had a solid foundation. And had been doing was doing speaking on, he called them side hustles. He was doing them on the side. And now he has a very successful speaking business. He wrote a book called Connectable Loneliness. So I think it addresses loneliness. So I think it's really important to get that solid foundation. I think I would definitely, I recommend to people, if you're serious about speaking, as far as, making money at it, and also developing your craft, both of those things, the business and the craft. Here in the United States, we have the national speakers. You guys have PSA. The chapters are all around the world, right? So who knows who's going to see this? But yeah, so I think that's where I gained. I would say I found out I've learned so many lessons from being involved in National Speakers Association. I can't think of a better way to uplift your speaking career and develop the connections or relationships, the role models, and also support other people. I just had a new, right before our talk here, a younger speaker who her career is taking off, and I'm happy to share my do's and don'ts, my lessons learned. Yeah. So we can't really get better, right, unless we have that circle, that community.
Yeah, that's really, really fabulous advice. Now, I just want to mention a couple of things before we wrap up, and one of them is your podcast.
Yes,
Allies. So obviously that's kind of a newish thing for you, and you obviously stepping out of your comfort zone maybe to bring that to life. But I've been listening to some of the episodes, and it's really valuable, and you have some amazing guests.
Mel. That I appreciate. Yeah. I've actually been doing a lot of interviews through videos through the years, and I recommend that too with people like you're doing on YouTube, and, just interviewing people, maybe having a theme to your series. We just did, I did one with a friend we were looking at a topic called Quiet Men. We interviewed leaders in that. I have a podcast. Yes. We're just wrapping up season 1. We're going to be recording the next season soon. And this is called Introvert Ally. And it's really about how do we support introverts at work. And I'm interviewing people who are torchbearers in the field of introvert knowledge, who have written about it, who have actually played all kinds of roles, senior roles, who as introverts who believe very much in the cause of really talking about this important part of personality that affects half the population. Yeah. So I think we can be better allies when we have conversations, and we can change cultures that way. And so that's why I'm really enjoying those discussions, and I hope people are too. I'm getting something out of it.
Fantastic. And so I highly recommend that. I also recommend that people get onto your website and download those free chapters from your book. So what's the website address?
So it's my name, and then they can decide if they want to purchase it or not. But we have all 4 books on there and quizzes. So it's Jennifer Kahnweiler. Jennifer is spelled like Jennifer, Jennifer. And it's Kahnweiler is KAHNWEILER.com. And it's pretty easy to navigate. I think you probably agree.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'm going to wrap it up, because what you've shared today has been so valuable. I think that anybody who's listening and or watching this is going to take away a whole lot of useful and practical tips in order to help their own speaking, for one, but also that your slant on introversion and extroversion, I think, is really interesting. And when I have people come to me and say, oh, I can't be a good speaker because I'm an introvert, it's like the fact that you've just demonstrated or outlined what are the strengths of introverts when they're presenting, I think is really valuable as well. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I look forward to sharing this with my audience and your audience, and really spreading the word more so. But I just can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom with us today. So thank you so much, Jennifer.
My total pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.